TLDR, grind your buff chain ASAP after Simulation Room reset, then just chill for the rest of the time, one-shotting the bosses and claiming all the rewards.
It's going to be a bore, isn't it?
Simulation Room is the place where you can obtain battle data sets and manuals. The former one is needed to level up NIKKEs. You're gonna miss this shit a lot in mid-game. The latter one is really rare and is used for leveling up your NIKKE skills and bursts, so make sure you do Simulation Room daily. Seriously, don't make our green-haired elf cutie upset. Pay her a visit. The concept is simple. In each run you have to clear 5 to 7 battle stages, choosing a random buff or event before each stage. All of your selected buffs go into active buffs, your temporary buff storage during the run. After clearing the last boss stage, you can pick just one buff from your active to be saved to your permanent storage, called buff legacy, and lose the rest. All buffs stored in the legacy will be taken into each new simulation run, no matter how many times you lose or end simulation, until you decide to replace them. By repeating this process, you can save up to 8 buffs in your legacy.
Wake me up when the battle is over.
If you're a complete beginner, your first goal will be to unlock all the difficulties. To do so, progress through the story, level up your NIKKEs, and clear the hardest sector you can at the moment. By the way, ignore the enemy's firepower. Most of the time you will have to fight underpowered, and that's totally okay. Just try to beat harder levels, because there's nothing to lose. Also, you don't need to care about buffs that much at this state of game. But just in case you're unlucky shit and struggle even with easier levels, just use chapters to see my buff tier list. So eventually all the difficulties will become available to you, way before you can actually clear the last ones. But don't worry, this is just the beginning.
That was fast.
Welcome
To the mid-game. Now you're ready for your next goal, entering the everlasting 2 weeks long loop of grinding buffs, gaining rewards, and losing buffs on reset.
Monday left me broken.
Yep, all the buffs you were collecting into Legacy will be wiped every 2 weeks. So wake up
Wake up. Wake up.
and begin to grind your buff chain right now. To be more specific, make the best possible buff chain during the first day after reset to be able to quickly clear Simulation Room for the rest of the period. In the best case, you only need to beat the last sector, since you always get the rewards from sectors below the cleared one.
Simulation begins.
Let's get to the business. During the run, you will encounter choices with different options, like buffs or special events. There are 3 types of buffs: attack, affect damage and crit; survival, affect HP and defense; strategic, affect reload and hit rate. Every type has good and not so good buffs. All you need to do is collect the best of each category. So every time you see the choice between attack, survival or strategic, just pick one you don't have in your legacy yet. But remember, you can't have 2 identical buffs. You can always check your active buffs there. But wait, sometimes I have to choose from shapes. Ignore that for now. Just pick any shape. That only means it will give you a buff of a random type with the shape you've chosen. Events. Besides, there are random events called unknown rewards. Don't be deceived though, for they can contain dangerous debuffs that can ruin your run, so only pick that option if your buff chain is built and you just want to have some fun. Last but not least, there's ICU and Spec Up. ICU restores HP. Spec Up enhances your active buffs. They can appear occasionally during the run, but before the boss stage, you always have the choice between these 2, so only pick ICU if you really need healing before the boss fight. Otherwise, just go for Spec Up.
Not looking good.
Now that you know how to collect buffs, I'm gonna explain what buffs to pick. But there are 21 buffs in total. Do I need to remember them all just to build a good buff chain? Not at all. Let me make your life easier. You can completely ignore the majority of buffs. So what buffs can be trashed straight away? Let's read the description. As soon as you see when HP falls below 20%, you don't need that buff. In no case you can make use of it, since 20% is close to death. So all of those are worthless. All the epic buffs can be trashed too, because they are single use and will disappear after 1 run. Only pick them if your buff chain isn't full, or you still struggle with enemies. Now that we are left with smaller selection, here's my tier list of buffs. But do keep in mind that it can vary depending on your state in game. This tutorial is for early and mid game.
On guard. Never mind.
As I just said, all epic buffs are trash long term, because they can't be carried over via buff legacy. That doesn't mean that they're bad, so you can still use them to even out your weak team for 1 run. All the below 20% are useless, unless you're really missing few seconds before killing boss and dying on him. Healing spray bullet has too low efficiency. Mid tier buffs are not necessarily bad, it's just that they are only good under certain circumstances and depend on team you have. For example, one of the best mid tier buffs is Sub Generator, as it scales off of your max HP, so it's a gem for late game. But for teams with low max HP, insignificant. Quick Charger and Hidden Power are go tier buffs, but only for characters with charging weapons like Sniper Rifle. Focus Scope is indeed a very good buff, but only for NIKKEs with low hit rate weapons like shotguns. You don't need it for Sniper Rifle. Chain Ammo is just okay. Alpha Particle Chaff could be good, but it only works for your target, so on the map with tons of ruptures, not too helpful. Now heading to the top tier. Compact Beam Barrier increases basic defense, which is not as efficient, but it works for every team, just as all buffs in go tier on my list. It is better to have Impact Inducer and Homing Guider together, as they are complementary, though the percentage isn't so high. Crit is crit after all. Drain Converter is absolute overkill, or I would say overheal. It's even more effective if you have NIKKEs with machine guns.
I need more bullets!
buffs. High quality powder is a winner. The description speaks for itself. This is the exact buff that makes your firepower rise, and the more of this buff you have, the better. I recommend to get at least 2 of those, with different effective 4 modifier depending on your team. That's it, now you know what to pick. Have fun.
Fun. Wait a minute.
What is a modifier and all these strange symbols on buff cards?
I'm not going too easy on you, am I?
Let me explain. There are 3 buff modifiers. Quality. This is pretty simple because you already know how it works. Buffs can be either R, SR, SSR or Epic, from weakest to strongest respectively. So if you've spotted a top tier buff but it's only R, take it anyway and wait until you stumble upon an identical one with a higher quality, or just try your luck and spec up. Shape. This one seems tricky, but let me sort things for you. Ignore the shape until you build a decent buff chain. As soon as you did, your goal is to turn your buff's different shapes into just one. It doesn't matter what shape, it just has to be the same one for all buffs. Your buff chain shows you what shapes do you already have. Say if your preliminary build chain has more triangles, it's easier for you to turn the rest into triangles. The method to change shapes is the same as with quality. Either you randomly find identical buffs of desired shape, or again try your luck and spec up. As for why you need to match the shapes, simple. That's how you level up your buffs. The more shapes are matching, the higher level your buff will be. See? Not that difficult after all. The last modifier is effectiveness. That means such a buff will work only for a specific group of NIKKEs. This one only works for attacker NIKKEs, this one only for Elysian, and this one only for pilgrims, and so on respectively. Now, do you remember I've said you can't have 2 identical buffs in your chain? Well, same buffs with different effectiveness are not considered identical. So for example, if you want to go for max damage chain, you can take even 3 high quality powders with different effective 4 if you like, but it strongly depends on your team. I'll show you my team as an example. It mainly consists of pilgrim attackers, so by having 3 of those for my team will be as triple effect of this buff, just because almost every NIKKE on my team is a pilgrim and an attacker at the same time. But if you're not super lucky, if you don't have a consistent team, or just don't want to use NIKKEs of the same type or manufacturer, all you need to do is take buffs without effectiveness. Those are an absolute priority for the most of the players, despite their manufacturer or class. But of course, being so good, they're pretty rare, so repeat the same procedure, build your buff chain with any effectiveness until you're able to replace them with buffs without any effectiveness. That's it.
You think you've won? Think again!
Now that I have set your goal for a daily grind, you're free to decide how exactly you achieve it. Whether you prefer to build your chain with good but low quality or mixed shape buffs and then gradually replacing them one after another, or taking only the best buffs from the beginning. But I understand that not all of you have time to think it over. So especially for you, I prepared the best, easiest and fastest strategy to build a good buff chain on the first day after reset. Step 1. Spam an easy sector like 2A. First few runs collect every good buff you can get, despite its modifiers or quality. Keep in mind to never pick the epic buff after the boss fight, for they're only single use. Refuse them, save the best active buff and just end the simulation. Then start over the same sector. As soon as you have 8 decent buffs, step 2. Look for identical buffs of the better quality, desired shape or without effective 4. Repeat the scheme until you have a perfect or nearly perfect buff chain. This is my example. If you're lucky enough, you'll be able to do it just in half an hour. Step 3. Look at your current firepower and compare it to the state before building a chain. What a giga chat.
That's a lot of damage. No, that's a lot of damage.
Now you're able to clear the hardest stage you couldn't clear before. In my case, it's 5C. But if you're still on lower levels, begin with 1 sector ahead of what you would normally clear. Of course, the best case scenario is if your buffs are enough to do quick battle on every stage before the boss, so you can save some time. Also, from now on, you can refuse any buffs because you already built your chain, and thus don't need to waste any time on reading or choosing. Defeat the final boss, claim the rewards. Easy.
What do you think of the simulation room? Quite a trip, isn't it?